Well, welcome back, everyone. I am Michael Finkelstein, and I'm here at Sunraven, my home office, a small farm outside of New York City, about 50 miles outside of New York City, and it is Wednesday, June 10th. And I am really grateful to be able to spend some time with people these days, especially remotely, where I can offer some advice and wisdom with regard to health. This is an open-ended conversation, meaning I am willing and able, or willing at least, to address any and all questions that you may want to discuss with regard to health, wellness, the whole concept of each other as individuals, as a community, as a whole society. There's just so many things going on right now. Last week I spent some time talking about the Black Lives Matter and the social injustice, the things that have really taken over our collective consciousness these days, and I would say that that's pretty universal. Though I imagine some people have other thoughts and opinions than what we commonly hear in the media, but I don't think too many people are without thoughts or feelings on the subject. Whether or not they relate to us as individuals in terms of our health and well-being at the moment is sort of a separate matter. But I did address it because I feel like these are sorts of things, whether we know it or not, contribute to our health. Just like pollution, air pollution, contributes to our health, whether we see it or not, whether we appreciate it in our own lungs or not. Since we know it exists, it's sort of hard to escape. And if it doesn't even affect us directly, we know for sure it's affecting other people around us who we care about, who affect us. And so these things are, when I use the word global or universal, they're in the energy fields around us, and that does have impact on each of us. So if there's more to discuss on that subject, please send me your questions because I can continue to go on there. I don't want to make this political or even aggravating in any way. So, but I am interested in questions as they relate to how you're dealing with this. Or how you're dealing with COVID, which is getting tiring for most people by now. Though there's some opening up and release, I think it's still strange times. My gym, for instance, will be opening next week in New York. And they're not sure yet how they're going to do it. Is everyone going to wear a mask? How do people stay apart? If you have a personal trainer, are they actually going to touch you, like stretching you, or be close to you? What about the friendships that you have there that you're used to and that you enjoy as part of the whole process? Obviously, things are very different. And when things are different, it stresses us. So it requires an adjustment. Some people do that better than others. And that's really another thing that we're dealing with now. And a lot of it is imposed on us. It's not something necessarily we could say we've chosen or because of our own personal bad decisions we are experiencing it now. This is just more in the atmosphere of our world that is affecting us. So I hear from more and more people about that. And so I'm addressing it these days quite a bit. But I'm open to anything you want to share with me, any questions. I did post my email on the top of this Instagram Live so that if you want to reach me, you can. It's michael@sunraven.org. You can also call Four Moon Spa or connect with them, which is who's hosting us tonight, because they know how to reach me. And I look forward to returning to Encinitas late this year to spend another great winter there and getting closer to the community in the San Diego County area and all of Southern California, which seems to possess a wherewithal and a mindset that I find, quite frankly, is a bit healthier in general than it is in the Northeast, where I come from and tend to live. Anyway, I just wanted to share that and how much I appreciate Four Moon Spa and all of you who've come through them. So send me an email right now, or send me in your comments, send me a question, or send me an email at any other time. So let me start with a question that was sent to me during the week. It's sort of one of the most common questions that I receive, and even before the current epidemics and the issues that we're facing now that I talked about just a minute ago. But it's a question that is about energy, and a lot of people say it this way, that I have this low energy. I'm not just feeling as normal vitality as usual. It's nothing I can put my finger on. I'm sort of sleeping okay. I'm doing what I normally do. I'm active. Things are okay in my life, but my energy level just doesn't feel the same. And then they follow that up with what's going on. So it's a pretty common question. And I think in most of our lives at one point or another, we hit a phase like that. Something, that we can't really pinpoint seems to be pretty insidious, but it's draining our energy. It's one thing if we have a cold, we have a flu, we have something worse than the flu. We know what that is. It's usually self-limiting. We accept that there's a diagnosis. We may not like it, but it does explain why we're symptomatic. One of the harder things to deal with is symptoms that arise where you don't really understand the cause. That creates two problems. One is the symptoms themselves, but the other is the unknown and the unknowing. And that creates a state of anxiety because people really want to know what's going on, because it makes sense. If you know what's going on, you have a shot at handling it. Whereas if you're in the dark and you're unclear, then you're maybe more nervous because it's invisible. And so this is this common question, because it's common in general as a symptom complex, but it possesses that second quality, which is it doesn't always have an obvious explanation, and that makes people secondarily nervous. Now, most people, very often, if it persists or if it's really severe at any point, they'll go see a physician initially, their healthcare practitioner. And a lot of people will then get blood work, they'll get an exam, and more often than not, there is nothing disclosed either in the blood work or in the exam. People are not unusually anemic, their thyroid function is okay, their blood counts are okay, there's nothing wrong with their liver or kidneys, there are obviously no major disease that they're experiencing, their heart seems okay. So they leave that visit with the same question that they went in. They may be somewhat reassured that this is not a major disease because it should have shown up on blood work. But in my experience, people are not terribly reassured because they're still quite symptomatic, and it's such a gnawing experience for people that it does make them quite nervous. So I see people usually around that time. They already have seen a physician or two, or maybe some other people. They've tried to understand it themselves. Maybe some people have done some work, like maybe try to get to bed earlier, get outside, do some more activity, eat differently. People know that these basic general well-being strategies could be really useful at that time. But then this is often something that does not resolve so easily. And of course, that's when you seek out a more holistic person quite often, because the conventional route doesn't really address very well some of these chronic insidious syndromes. I assume whether you have had this happen to you, you probably know people who it's happened to. And you may also wonder one day if that's going to happen to you anyway, because we tend to be nervous about things we hear about in other people or is brought about in the public. And this is part of what I think one of the benefits of social media, of course, is our connection. And one of the things about social media is the fact that we can get very nervous because we're hearing all these stories of people who get into trouble in one way or the other, or are suffering in one way or the other. And we can project through our own compassion and empathy that could happen to us or somebody we care about. So it's out there, just like the virus and the social injustice, this unknown syndrome that will sap your energy, gets us worried. Maybe it gets people worried specifically because they think it's sort of the prodrome to death, that I'm just going to drain energy until it's all gone. I don't think people go there so easily. But if you extrapolate worry and anxiety of any form, you usually get to that point where you feel somehow deep down that you're at risk for annihilation, complete annihilation, that this is the beginning of the end. And when things are unknown and unclear, where you can't address it because you don't know what it is to direct attention, then you just get nervous. It's just going to get worse. So I imagine you've had this experience. And so you might say, so then what do you do, Michael, Dr. Finkelstein? What do you do if I came to your office or somebody I sent to you comes into your office with that question? How do you handle that? Here's how I do it. What I try to do is get to know that person first. It's a typical doctor would maybe examine you, get blood work. They might talk to you and ask you the story of what those symptom is, but they're not necessarily interested in you. They want to get to the bottom of the symptom as quickly as possible because they have a limited amount of time. And one of my teachers, one of the historical teachers of Western medicine, a man named Dr. William Osler from Johns Hopkins University at the turn of the 20th century, so around 1900, said it's as important to know the person who has the disease as much as it is to know the disease. So he's speaking to the point that knowing the person is very meaningful to the work of a doctor. And that's where I start. I want to know who you are, what's going on, what kind of person you are, what's going on in your life. Very often in that part of the story, you're going to tell me about things like how your life is organized, what your joys and passions are, what your work is about, what you feel is meaningful, the people in your life who are important, where you live, how you live. And in there are often a lot of clues as to where there may be some gaps or cracks in a foundation, because those are foundational. So right then and there, and that may take, frankly, 20 minutes. So my visits tend to be 90 minutes. I've been known to spend 3 or 4 hours with people the first time I've seen them, if they have the time, and I do. Sometimes to get to the bottom of something that's complex, and who's to say that each and every one of us is not a complex being. If we really wanted to address the whole, it would take some time. Now, not everyone necessarily has the patience for that amount of time. I understand. So I try to keep my focus to give people an answer within 90 minutes. That's generally what I do. So the first 20 minutes, though, I'm going to be just like, I want to know who you are. And that may feel strange to many clients, patients, because they're usually not asked those types of questions by doctors. In fact, I have a questionnaire that's 28 pages long. It's not single-spaced, doesn't require more than maybe an hour to complete, but it is an hour-long inventory of your life, who you are. I ask questions like, what's your favorite season? Or what books have you read lately? Or where have you traveled? Where do you want to go? What's your favorite hobbies? Things like, what do you dream about? These are parts of the questionnaire that I ask, and it's very interesting. And often people find it interesting because they've not only not been asked that question by anyone else, but they haven't really looked at those questions about themselves at all themselves. So sometimes they learn about themselves. I want to know who you are, because I can't imagine giving people advice that is going to ultimately suggest that they consider changing their perspective on life, or I'm going to offer them a new idea about how to frame their whole life. Because I think, frankly, we lose a lot of energy when we're not clear of what we're doing. If I don't know, why I wake up in the morning every day, what's meaningful, it's very hard to muster the energy to do that. It's actually hard to be motivated, frankly, to take care of myself as much if I don't recognize how important I am to myself and to the people perhaps that I do serve. And so when people often get to that state, it's often that they're on the verge of a crisis in their life, about more an existential crisis about who they are, what they're doing, where they're going in their life. That causes a major drain in our energy. That's why those people sometimes are eating well and they're even resting well, but they've got a hole in the bottom of the bucket, and no matter how much they put into it, there's a leak, and it's not just sustaining them. And so they notice this trickle, and it does get them a little on the nervous side. So in the story, I often find is sort of the crux of the answer. Of course, I do want to know very basic, fundamental things about a person's physical life and their body, because this is a physical symptom, at least initially, to think about. And so it is really important to look at the physical body. And that's why I do appreciate what other doctors do, like by taking blood work and doing exams, because with that information, I'm reassured myself that the physical body is pretty intact. But I do more questions about the physical body. I want to know how people sleep, the quality of their sleep, how many hours they sleep. I do ask the question about dreams, because dreams reflect deep sleep. So I want to know you're dreaming. I want to know how your digestive tract works, from your taste and your cravings, to what you eat and how your bowels work. And I want to see that that's all in good shape. I want to understand things about your complexion, the color of your eyes, the perkiness of your being, the quality of your hair and skin. These are all reflections of the body from often the point of view of nutrients, minerals, vitamins. Then I go into the next most important subject when it comes to energy, which is relationships. We all know what it feels like to have a really challenging relationship and how drained we would feel chronically. Now, sometimes the obvious relationship problem is obvious, but often we have a collection of old relationships, things we've maybe taken for granted, they are what they are, but they could be draining us nonetheless. Very often, one of the key relationships is with our parents. And often when I see people, their parents are not even alive. And yet you do have a relationship with your parent. It may be historical, but it did shape you in many ways. And that relationship could have a lot to do with your current relationships in your life, including maybe the most important relationship, which is the one with yourself, how you feel about yourself. And so, as I said, sometimes this existential crisis is, I'm not feeling sure about who I am or where I'm going. Sometimes the root of that has to do with an experience or experiences collectively in childhood and how you've been shaped and viewed. Going into the subject sort of in parallel of social injustice, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're a minority in any other way, then you've lived your whole life with a little bit of persecution, a little bit of outcasting, a little bit of injustice, maybe a lot, and frankly, a certain amount of abuse, a little or a lot. And so that may be, in a weird way, your normal. It's not normal, of course, but it may be what you're used to. But after time, that also contributes to a tremendous amount of energy drain. And so when we think about energy, then our relationships are really important. The ones with ourselves, the one with key people in our lives, starting with our parents, our siblings, of course, our significant others, children, and maybe the closest inner circle of companions and friends. And when you look at those relationships, you take an inventory and you can see those in trouble. And then you go back to the question about energy. You could see that there may be a cumulative effect. Very often, what's maybe obvious to all of you is that it's not one of these things or another. If it was one, it would be pretty easy to deal with. What tends to happen for people is several of these things at the same time. And so when I give people that questionnaire and then I speak to them for 20 minutes and then I speak to them for another hour, I start to piece together a picture of several things, maybe the key things that are all working in concert to create this energy drain. The last third of my appointments and visits really are geared toward helping people construct a plan to address those things. Again, we remember that these people have already seen doctors. They've already eliminated some of the major problems and diseases. But this is an opportunity now to sort of address this. It's not negating the possibility that there's still a hidden occult medical condition. So the worst case scenario is like a cancer. More commonly is a chronic infection of some sort like Lyme disease, or toxicity, heavy metals and other things that could drain people. I get there, but I don't do that as the next thing unless in the questions and answers I see a reason to think that that's higher on the list. What I really want people to focus on is what I just have been talking about for the last 10 minutes, is this inventory of my life, my place in life, my existential moment, my thinking about my purpose and the reason I need energy, and my key relationships. And then I go into a little bit about my daily habits like food and sleep and sunlight. And I tell people to try that. Try to come up with this plan that I work with them to finish before they leave. They have a plan. And then I usually say, try that for 3 weeks. Something like that. Really make a sincere effort to address these things. Sometimes when it comes to relationships, obviously it's not fixable in 3 weeks. So maybe what they have to do is just let out some steam, which is writing, journaling, expression, art. When it comes to our habits like food and sleeping and getting outside, people can usually do that if they're committed. And when it comes to reflecting on yourself and your life's purpose, Often that takes some more quiet time, but I ask people to try to put this together, try to address some of these things, try to shape up some of those habits that are marginal, and then return in 3 weeks, and then we get to see what's next. I will tell you from my experience that 75% of people, 2/3, 3/4 of people, feel much better with that approach. Now, of course, that's not everybody, but it's a good place for everybody, because for the group of people who are not yet receiving the benefit of that, it does maybe suggest we need to go further into some more medical diagnostics, but at least they've created this better foundation. Usually when people are not much better, it's not that they're no better at all, they may be marginally better. So that's a good place to be if you're then going to explore nutritional deficiencies, infectious diseases like Lyme, heavy metal toxicity and the need to detox heavy metals, or something more substantial that requires more medical evaluation, and then maybe, if there is a diagnosis, treatment. But a person is in better shape to receive whatever those things may be offered. And either way, this approach, therefore, has value. The first part of all approaches in my mind is to ask somebody, what do you think it is? And even though people say, well, I don't know, that's why I'm here, doctor. I came to you because I don't know what it is. But if I ask people to just sit back, don't think about it as a medical diagnosis, because of course that's hard to figure out on your own. But what's your suspicion? What do you think is going on that you're feeling this drained? And I would say 90% of people tell me, well, the last couple of weeks, month, longer, I've been really stressed. Stressed about what? That answer, stressed about what, is usually the answer. And so this is what I would leave you with tonight. I would have you, if you're experiencing this, or maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm not experiencing it now, but I'd love to prevent it. The strategy still works. Take this inventory. Contact me. I'll send you this 77 questions that are this inventory about how am I doing, mind, body, spirit type questions, but not the 28 pages, although you can request that as well, and I'm happy to speak to you and see you as well. But if you want to request the inventory of those questions, I'll happily send it to you. I will have a workshop next Wednesday, as a matter of fact, on those 77 questions. And if you're interested in that, you can go to my website, slowmedicine.org, and you can do that. And I'd love to see you there, and I'd love to receive any questions that you have about anything that's going on for you. And if in neither of those places, I'll be back here next week to share some more insights with you and answer any questions that you might have. So thank you very much for joining me tonight. It's always been a pleasure, and I really hope you're well, and I hope our world heals. Take care.